three examples of BMW M5s from three different generations. We have a E28 M5, the original Black Bart, an E34 M5, and an E39 M5. It's interesting because the M5 moniker, is that the right way to pronounce that? Moniker designates what we as car guys call Q-ships. What's a Q-ship, you ask? A Q-ship is a term back from one of the world wars where it would be a normal looking ship on the outside, but it would have armaments on the inside. So very stealthy, but very powerful. And in my opinion, just my opinion, my internet troll friends, internet trolls, the M5 has been the purest example of a car Q-ship that there ever has been. It is a rocket ship. It is very sedate looking, and from a interior accoutrement position, very stylish, very comfortable, right? The M5s have always epitomized a car that looks like a luxury car. It looks very comfortable. It is very comfortable, and it can drive like a normal car. But then, when you rev up the car and you really start pushing it, it totally changes personalities to a rocket ship, and a well-handling rocket ship. You know, there's some other companies that make really fast cars in a straight line, but they don't all handle like an M5 does. That's one of the key things in my mind of an M5, because I've been lucky enough to drive the later generations, the E60 M5, the F chassis M5, and you know what? They still hold, in my mind, the same personality as the earlier M5, right? You know, it's just super interesting to me how the formula has changed a little bit over the years. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the overall personality of the car has not. So, in this comparison, let's start with the E28. The original M5, okay? Super basic from the outside. You know, didn't look like a crazy, exotic supercar that it was underneath. BMWM spent a lot of time on the engine and the suspension, and quite frankly, the high revving personality of this car. You know, and it's interesting, when I drive all three cars back to back to back, you know, obviously the E28 M5 has the least amount of power out of all three cars. But the way that motor revs and the way that motor sounds, and the way it makes power is so cool. It is such a cool car. Yeah, the suspension is not the most advanced. When you really push a stock version of this car, it will understeer. In fact, what's really happening is the front of the car is so heavy with that motor, it's a straight six, that the McPherson struts actually flex, which causes a loss of negative camber when you bend the car into a corner, so you get more positive camber. And it doesn't have great traction. In fact, there's a fix to that where you can weld supports so the struts will not flex under tension. It's a totally different conversation, but kind of cool. Yes, and I've driven several E28 M5s on track, and they're just a ball to drive on track. Super interesting car. And just, it's got that quintessential square box BMW look. So, cool motor, nice gearbox, a very interesting vintage car, right? Then you move to the next iteration of that car and that motor, and you get the E34 M5. Bigger car, a little more electronics, a little more oomph, to the motor. Again, the same thing, super comfortable. The motor in the E34 M5 is the S38. Yes, there's two variants, a B36 and a B38, different displacement, both making about 300 horsepower-ish, right? Which was a bump up from the M88 and the E28 M5. So more displacement, more power, more luxury, more electronics, right? The E28 M5, like I said, was very simple of a car. It was a very simple time. The E34 came from a time of, let's start doing some electronics, right? Like the 90s, they started adding cool stuff to the car. The suspension was also updated. The car handled much better than the E28 did. Instead of trailing arms, you had a multi-link suspension. There was a bunch of upgrades, right? As we're talking about the motors, the S38 engine and the E34 M5 is similar in a lot of ways to the M88 engine, the E28 M5, because they both love to rev. Love to rev. And these are naturally aspirated motors, so guess what, kids? It's not a turbocharged motor or a supercharged motor where you hit the throttle and you get instant torque. No, no, no. These motors, you must rev, okay, to make power, to make torque, okay? And they're both so similar because they love to rev, all right? You can feel the additional weight in E34 M5, obviously, like when you brake or you turn, you feel the extra weight, the extra mass in the car, right? But I think they did a really good job in balancing out that more powerful motor with a bigger, more luxurious chassis with more weight, unfortunately, to still make a really respectable Q-ship. And again, in its day, the E34 M5 was a monster, right? It was a supercar, an undercover supercar. Didn't look like a supercar, didn't have flares and hood scoops and all the other stuff supercars do, but it was really brisk. E34 M5, super comfortable car, really powerful car, more powerful than the previous generation. The next one, E39 M5. Now this car is legendary. E39 M5 is truly a rocket ship, okay? Now, they changed the formula a little bit. You know, they went from the S38 straight 6-cylinder in the E34 M5 to a V8, the S62 motor. Now this motor, like I said, is super legendary because it made a lot of power. I think like 400 horsepower or something like that, okay? It's cool because this motor was used in a lot of race cars, prototype race cars. A lot of them for many years ran S62s. Now modified, grant you, but S62s. The famous BMW Z8, which I think is a gorgeous, stunning car, guess what? It used an S62, okay? And I can go on and on. There's lots of other chassis that use the S62 motor because it was so good, okay? And the same thing though, same similar feeling as the previous generation cars where it's not instant power off the line. It's not like a turbocharged car. It likes to rev. Now, more weight, more luxury, bigger car. And you feel the weight, okay? But the same thing, that car can turn. That car can stop really well. In fact, BMW had the greatest commercial, I thought, in the world for the E39 M5. And I think you can find it on YouTube, if you look up like, you know, BMW E39 rocket car, something like that. Oh, let me set it up. So what you see is, you see one of these rocket propelled cars, like it's shaped like a torpedo on like the salt flats in Utah, right? I think it's Utah. And it's just rocketing around, right? And you see a camera view like this next to the car, right? And it's going, the camera's here, and the camera goes up here. And it shows a frontal view of the rocket car zooming along the salt flats. And then everything slows down. And then another camera kind of pans back. And what do you see? You see the rocket car with its parachutes stopping, and then in front of it, the camera car, which passed it and took a video of it at speed, was an E39 M5, okay? Which I think is the greatest commercial of all time. Greatest commercial of all time. Anyway, so the E39 M5 is another Q-ship that is still used today. I think I saw a road and track comparison maybe just a year or two ago of a more modern type of Q-ship car. And what they compare it to? The E39 M5, okay? When Cadillac came out with their rocket ship, their CTS-V thingy, whatever, what'd they do? They compared it to an E39 M5. In fact, Road and Track did a whole article comparing the new Caddy and E39 M5. And you know what the funny part of it to me was personally? They were doing like, you know, 0 to 60 tests, they were doing like slalom tests, blah, blah, blah. And it's the Cadillac did very well. But the funny part is, the Cadillac kept breaking. The transmission broke from what I think I remember. And then something else overheated, and all this shit was happening. Guess what? The M5 was like, oh, you wanna play some more? It just goes to show you how incredibly cool and reliable that car was. And the same thing, driving it back to back to back was interesting to me because it has more power, you know, like 100 horsepower more, something like that, than the previous generation car. It has a more dialed in suspension. In fact, a friend of mine, you know who you are, Tom, he and I were both instructors for the BMW club, and Tom had an E39 M5 that he used to track. And we were at a racetrack somewhere. And he said, "Well, come on, jump in, go for a ride." So we went for a ride, and we are sliding this car around, and we're both hysterical laughing at how much fun this car is to get sideways and how much power and torque it had in order to move the car. In fact, I just saw Tom this past week at Summit Point. So shout out to you, my friend Tom. So, the E39 M5, again, same vein as the previous two cars, just the same evolution as they do, right? More airbags, more luxury, more electronics, and unfortunately, more weight, okay? But more power. So, BMW did a really good job in balancing it out. So interesting, people ask me, which is your favorite of the three cars? And I gotta tell you, all three. I love all three cars, I'm sorry. Because they're similar, yet they're different. It's interesting because like the E28 M5 is on one end of the spectrum, fairly powerful car, but really light on its feet and a really simple car. Simple dashboard layout, that sort of thing. The E39 M5 was the big power, the bruiser of the bunch, right? But the most weight and the most luxury. And the E34 was kind of somewhere in between there. Like it started to get electronics, but not as many as the E39 M5. But it wasn't as light or simple as the E28, but it had a better suspension. So, honestly, what I would love, I'd love to have one of each. That's what I would love, right? They're just really fun cars. And no, they're not race cars. No, they're not like crazy, amazing handling cars for those of you trolls who are gonna say things about this. But in my humble opinion, they are comfortable cars, all three of them. They are fairly larger sedans compared in the era. Of course, it's hilarious, by the way. If you look at, for example, an E28 M5 or an E28 series, 5 series, and you compare it to like a modern F chassis car, a 3 series. The modern 3 series is bigger significantly than the 5 series of the E28 era. So cars always get bigger and heavier and more complicated. But it's interesting to me that BMW has kept a commonality, a common thread between these multiple generations of cars, So, fun cars. Hope you enjoyed the video. I love doing the video. It was very super cool for me because I've driven all three cars in different times, but to drive them back to back to back to back was actually a really cool, way of tying all three cars together lineage-wise and super similarity-wise, but to show how different they are,
Last but certainly not least, the legendary E28 M5.
I hope you enjoyed our little video of the E28 M5, the E34 M5, and the mighty E39 M5. Was this an exhaustive review, in-depth knowledge sharing of these three cars? No, of course it wasn't. Those are for my troll friends. This was just like the videos we normally do, which is, you know what? These are cool cars. We should have respect for them. We should enjoy these cars for what they are, because they are truly special cars. They're moments in history of kind of what was happening in the car world. Anyway, so hope you enjoyed the video. Remember, like, subscribe, share, enjoy the drive. I'm out.